There are moments in history when power does not change through conquest, invasion, or fire. Instead, it shifts quietly through realization. The kind of realization that arrives too late to stop what has already been set in motion. During the Cold War, the world became accustomed to loud symbols of power, missile parades, nuclear tests, speeches filled with certainty and threat. But the most decisive advantages were often the ones never announced. They were not meant to intimidate, they were meant to exist. And when the Soviet Union finally understood what the United States had built in silence, it was not anger that followed. It was something far more unsettling: acceptance. For much of the Cold War, the balance of power appeared understandable. Two superpowers locked in an endless standoff, each watching the other with obsessive attention. Satellites tracked missile silos. Radar stations scanned the skies. Intelligence agencies catalogued every aircraft, every test, every movement. Nothing, it seemed, could happen without being noticed. And for years this belief held firm. The Soviet Union trusted its air defense network, its interceptors, its radar coverage stretching across thousands of kilometers. They believed speed had limits, altitude had limits. Physics itself would enforce boundaries that no nation could cross without consequence. What the Soviets did not know was that quietly, without speeches or parades, American engineers had begun asking a different question. Not how to fight faster aircraft, not how to intercept higher targets, but how to make interception irrelevant. This was not a question born of arrogance, it was born of fear. In the late 1950s, the United States understood something fundamental. Information was becoming more valuable than firepower. Knowing what the enemy was doing, where they were moving, and how they were preparing could prevent wars before they began. The problem was simple and terrifying. Existing reconnaissance aircraft were being shot down. In 1960, when a U-2 spy plane piloted by Francis Gary Powers was shot down over Soviet territory, the message was unmistakable. Altitude alone was no longer protection. The sky was no longer safe. For American planners, this moment was not a humiliation. It was a warning, and they listened. The response was not immediate, and it was not public. There was no announcement of a new aircraft, no promise of technological dominance. Instead, a small group of engineers, designers, and military planners were given a task so extreme it bordered on the impossible. Build an aircraft that could fly higher than any missile could reach, faster than any interceptor could chase, long enough to cross entire continents, and reliably enough to do it again and again, not once, not as a demonstration, but as a system. The result of this thinking would become the SR-71 Blackbird. But to call it an airplane misses the point. The Blackbird was not designed to fight. It carried no weapons. It was not meant to engage the enemy. It was designed to render engagement pointless. Flying above 80,000 feet and at speeds exceeding Mach 3, it existed in a realm where traditional air defense simply did not function. By the time radar detected it, the aircraft was already gone. By the time interceptors were scrambled, the Blackbird was hundreds of miles away. At first, Soviet radar operators did not believe what they were seeing. The returns made no sense. Speeds that exceeded known aircraft. Altitudes beyond operational ceilings. Some assumed equipment malfunction, others suspected deception. Reports were filed, questioned, revised, and filed again, but the data did not change. Something was flying over Soviet territory that could not be stopped. The Soviet response was thorough. New surface-to-air missiles were developed, interceptors were modified, entire defense doctrines were re-examined. Over the years, more than 4,000 attempts were made to track or intercept the Blackbird. Not one succeeded. Missiles exploded behind it, below it, or far off course. Pilots reported visual contact for seconds before losing sight entirely. Each failure carried the same conclusion. The aircraft was not breaking the rules. It was operating beyond them. What made the realization so profound was not the technology itself, but the implication. The United States was no longer reacting to Soviet defenses. It was shaping them. Every new radar installation, every missile upgrade, every interceptor deployment was, in effect, a response to something the Soviets could not change. The Blackbird forced the Soviet Union into a permanent defensive posture, and defense in the Cold War was a losing position. Inside the Kremlin, the understanding settled slowly. This was not a weapon that could be matched by copying it. The SR-71 was the result of an entire ecosystem: advanced materials, fuel chemistry, manufacturing precision, and operational doctrine. Even the fuel was unique, requiring special handling and formulation. The aircraft leaked fuel on the ground by design, sealing itself only at operational temperatures. This was not excess, it was necessity. By the late 1960s, the reality was undeniable. The United States could see deep into Soviet territory whenever it chose. It could gather intelligence without asking permission and without fear of retaliation. This did not lead to escalation. It led to restraint. When both sides understand the balance clearly, miscalculation becomes less likely. The Blackbird did not make war inevitable. It made surprise impossible. And so, something unusual happened. The Soviet Union stopped reacting publicly. There were no dramatic protests, no open admissions of failure, just silence, a silence that spoke volumes. In intelligence circles, silence often means understanding. The Blackbird continued to fly for decades, logging missions without loss, without interception, without confrontation. It simply existed, doing what it was designed to do. When the program was eventually retired, it was not because it had become obsolete. It was because its mission had been fulfilled. The world had changed. Satellites now did what the Blackbird once did alone. But the lesson remained. True power does not announce itself. It prepares, it calculates, and when the moment comes, it leaves no room for doubt. History often remembers the battles that were fought. It rarely remembers the ones that were rendered unnecessary. The SR-71 Blackbird was never meant to fire a shot. It was meant to deliver a message without words, a message the Soviet Union understood clearly and far too late. Some advantages are not meant to be seen, and once they are, there is nothing left to catch.